In a forgotten desert hangar, a broke mechanic saves a billionaire's jet and unknowingly triggers a chain reaction that could expose a silent war in the skies. But when the offer of a lifetime comes at midnight, is it a gift or a setup? Someone's watching. Systems are being sabotaged, and trust? That's the rarest part on board. He thought he was just fixing a machine. He didn't know he was the key to something much bigger than flight. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The desert didn't care who you were. Under its relentless Nevada sun, steel cracked, rubber rotted, and even the boldest names faded off old warehouse walls. Time didn't move here. It settled. Dust claimed everything. And in the middle of all that forgotten metal sat Jace Monroe, 34, denim jacket clinging to oil like a second skin, eyes shaded under the brim of a hat worn enough to have stories stitched into the threads. His fingers were blackened with grease that never washed off anymore. He had stopped trying. Jace didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The tools spoke for him, and the silence of the hangar was a conversation he understood better than most. Out here, no one cared about dreams, and dreams had long since stopped caring about Jace. Life had become routine. Fix what you can, keep what runs running, and don't get in anyone's way. That was the only currency worth anything when you were a mechanic on the lowest payroll at an almost defunct airstrip just west of Carson City. The other mechanics? Gone. Most had bailed for union jobs in bigger cities. A few stuck around, but today Jace was alone. Sunday mornings were slow. The kind of slow where the wind through busted chain-link fences had more life than the radios that sat muted on the shelf. He was underneath an old twin prop with a corroded underbelly when the radio finally did crackle. It didn't chirp like usual. It growled. Loud, confused, urgent. Dispatch wasn't supposed to be calling in anything today. Jace, you copy? The voice sputtered. Go ahead, Jace muttered, sliding out from under the bird, squinting toward the strip through dusty plexiglass. There's a unscheduled incoming. High clearance. Private. Looks like you're gonna want to see this. Jace wiped his hands on his rag. Nothing ever came in unannounced out here. Nothing important. Anyway. The kind of jets that buzzed these skies belonged to oil execs, not legends. Still, something about the static in the dispatcher's voice made his stomach shift. He walked out into the open, the heat punching down like a drunk brawler. And then he saw it. A black and silver jet, low on one side, its tail coughing smoke like a dragon choking on its own fire. It rumbled with authority. Not new, but pristine. Not military, but you wouldn't bet against it in a war. It didn't belong in a place like this. And it sure as hell didn't belong anywhere near Jace Monroe. The jet dipped, adjusted midair, then landed hard. Too hard. Sparks kissed the concrete. Smoke flared beneath its left wing. Jace's instincts kicked in before the tires had even stopped screaming. He grabbed a tool bag without thinking. It wasn't protocol. It was muscle memory. As the jet rolled toward the hangar, the lettering on its side caught the light. Shaquille O'Neal, Private Air. The name hit like a freight train. Not because it was unexpected, but because it didn't make sense. Why would a billionaire land his jet here? There were dozens of modern airfields between LA and Vegas. This one wasn't even mapped correctly on newer GPS systems. The crew door opened, steam hissing from the hydraulic seam. Two men exited first, both suited, both too clean for this place. They didn't glance at Jace. They looked past him like he was part of the rusted equipment. Then the giant emerged. Shaquille O'Neal didn't step out. He descended. His presence shifted the ground. The air. The rules. Even in black slacks, and a button-down shirt rolled to his elbows, he looked like he could bench press the jet he just exited. Jace had seen him before. Of course. Everyone had. On TV. On cereal boxes. Grinning beside kids in commercials. But in person, the man was bigger than myth. Yet something in his posture, the slow way he turned, the way he scanned the broken skyline, suggested weariness, not of body, but of spirit. Jace approached quietly, eyes on the smoke trailing under the fuselage. She's burning hot on the left rear brake. Might have locked, he said, more to the jet than to anyone else. One of the suited men stepped in front of him. You're not certified to inspect this aircraft. We need federal response. Jace didn't blink. Federal response is 3 hours out. You'll be ash by then. Shaq turned, finally noticing Jace. Their eyes met. Jace saw something strange there. Not judgment, not panic, just quiet calculation. Shaq gave a single nod. "Let him take a look," he said. The suited man bristled. "He's not clear. Neither is a funeral in the desert." "Let him." Jace crouched. The heat from the brakes nearly blistered his forearm. The undercarriage was scorched, bolts singed black. One misstep, and this plane would have cartwheeled. He popped the valve casing, flushed it, rewired the ignition override, and sealed the hydraulics in less than 20 minutes. The system was fragile, but holding. The whole time Shaq watched, Jace stood, sweat coating his neck. "It'll get you 20 minutes max. You shouldn't fly long on this. Get her to LA and ground her." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "That's all?" Jace nodded. "That's all you get in a place like this." A long silence followed. One of the other crewmen approached and handed Shaq a tablet. He reviewed the data Jace had just confirmed verbally. A mechanic's report typed in clean digital language. Jace hadn't touched it, which meant they'd been recording everything he said and checking it in real time. As the jet began to taxi again, one of the suited men tossed something toward Jace. It hit the ground near his boot. An envelope. Thick. He didn't touch it. The jet lifted seconds later, wheels scraping the earth like claws, and then it was gone. Jace stood there a moment longer than he needed to, eyes on the horizon. Dust curled up from the trail the jet had left, lingering in the air like a ghost, unsure of where it was supposed to go. He picked up the envelope. Inside, 5 crisp $100 bills, and a gold-plated business card that read, "Shaquille O'Neal Enterprises. Private contact line. Use only if it matters." Back in the hangar, the silence felt heavier. The radio was dead again. The other birds slept under tarps, half-forgotten projects on forgotten tarmacs. Jace sat beside a toolbox that doubled as a lunch seat. His hands were shaking, and he didn't know why. This should have been just another fix. Just another patch job to keep something rich running. But it wasn't. Not this time. Because there was a look in Shaq's eyes. Not gratitude. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he knew Jace. Or knew the weight Jace carried. The invisible kind. The kind that isn't on your back, but in your lungs, in your bones. The kind you don't speak of, because the world's not listening. Jace lit a cigarette he shouldn't have, stared out at the empty stretch of runway, and whispered to no one. One chance in a lifetime can wear the face of someone you've only seen on a billboard. He didn't know then that the jet had been deliberately routed to land here. Didn't know someone had whispered his name into ears far above his pay grade. Didn't know that this day, this rusted hangar, this seared jet, this strange billionaire, would be the beginning of everything he never believed he deserved. And that somewhere, in a penthouse hundreds of miles away, a man was already watching footage of the mechanic who didn't walk away. The hangar hadn't seen a billion-dollar jet in years, if ever. Most days it saw more jackrabbits than aircraft, more wind than payroll. And now Shaquille O'Neal's private jet had landed with one engine seizing, and the left brake pack glowing hotter than asphalt in July. It was the kind of plane Jace had only seen in photos and music videos, or clipped behind velvet ropes on some tarmac in LA. It didn't belong here, certainly not with a mechanic like him anywhere near it. But it was here, and so was Shaq. Up close he looked like something sculpted from concrete and calm. Shoulders like a bridge frame, voice like a bass line too deep to echo. Jace hadn't said a word when Shaq descended the jet stairs, but the presence of the man had hit harder than the dry wind whipping through the hangar doors. There was no entourage parade, no swarm of press, just one of the most recognizable men in America, standing in a place barely marked on a map, his gaze hidden behind dark lenses, his expression unreadable. The crew that spilled out behind him, though, was another story entirely. One of them was tall, sharp-suited, and immediately impatient. He paced like the world owed him somewhere to be. His name was Rick Landon, according to the badge clipped to his coat. The kind of man who shook hands with his fingertips and wiped them on his slacks after. Then came the pilot, Collins, aviator glasses, designer boots, and a smile so thin it could have sliced the tension in the air. He glanced at Jace the way someone might glance at a spill on a dinner napkin. "Great," Collins muttered, stepping past Shaq toward the smoking undercarriage. "We land in the middle of a junkyard, and the only person around is a guy who probably got his FAA license off Craigslist." Jace heard him. Didn't flinch. Didn't rise to it. Just stood with a tool bag at his side, and a question behind his teeth. Do I walk away, or do I fix what shouldn't be fixable? Rick Landon turned, Looked Jace up and down like he was inspecting a failed background check. This place doesn't even have certified airframe specialists on call. We should have diverted to Reno. Shaq didn't speak. He just watched. Still. Quiet. Jace met Rick's stare, held it long enough to make it uncomfortable. You landed here. You're lucky you're not picking through debris. The brakes are cooking your hydraulics alive. You either fix it now or call a flatbed and hope the FAA doesn't impound it while you're waiting. Rick stepped forward, not blinking. You even licensed, grease monkey. Collins chuckled, but not kindly. This is a federal-class aircraft. If anything on this bird's touched without clearance, it explodes, Jace snapped, cutting him off. And so do you. Rick's mouth twitched. Shaq tilted his head, arms still folded, silent as granite. But something behind those lenses flickered. Curiosity, maybe. Judgment. Definitely. Jace took a breath. It wasn't just about the plane. It never was. He could smell the disdain. It came off Rick in waves. The kind of prejudice wrapped in professionalism. The kind that wore a lanyard but carried the same contempt his father used to face every time they pulled into a garage that didn't expect black customers to own their own tools. Jace dropped his bag with a dull clank. I don't need to be here, he said flatly. You can call someone else. Someone whiter, maybe. Someone with cleaner hands. He turned. Stop, Shaq said finally. It wasn't a command. More like an offering. A single word stretched like a bridge across the moment. Jace paused but didn't turn. Shaq stepped forward. You the one fixed it before?
Yeah.
You said I've got 20 minutes on that patch. That's if the brake doesn't seize midair and punch through your wing. So yeah. Shaq nodded slowly, then pointed toward the jet. Fix it. Collins laughed again. We can't sign off on that. Shaq didn't look at him. Didn't move. You want to fly it or you want to roll it to LA? That shut everyone up. Jace stared at the jet a second longer. The thing was still ticking like a bomb under pressure. He'd need to cool the brake, rewrote the fluid lines manually, maybe rewire the flight relay just to buy more safety margin. It wasn't safe. It wasn't legal, technically. But it could be done. Barely. He glanced at Shaq. You got insurance? I've got faith. Shaq said simply. That was either confidence or madness. Maybe both. Jace didn't care. He turned back toward the plane, his pulse hammering. It took everything he had. The bolts were fused tight. The relay box was buried behind a heat shield, warped by friction. At one point he had to use a salvaged hose from a nearby decommissioned aircraft, just to keep the line from rupturing under pressure. Collins and Rick hovered, muttering, doubting. Shaq stood apart, arms crossed, jaw tight. Jace's knuckles bled where the wrench slipped. He didn't stop. Couldn't. Not when the heat blistered his forearms. Not when every minute he stayed under that bird risked a charge sheet and a federal citation. He didn't stop even when Rick muttered behind him, he better pray this isn't his last job. It wasn't prayer keeping him going. It was something older than that. A promise he made to himself a long time ago, that no matter who doubted him, he'd never walk away from a machine he knew he could save. He sealed the casing, took a long breath, stood slowly, dizzy from the heat and adrenaline. It'll fly, he said, not turning around. But you need a real fix in LA. And don't run the left turbine too hard, or it'll melt through the casing. No applause. Just silence. Then Shaq walked forward, stood toe-to-toe with Jace. You don't talk much. No reason to. Shaq smiled faintly. You just saved 3 lives, and about $30 million. Jace shrugged. Could have been worse. Could have landed in Barstow. For the first time, Shaq laughed, a low rumble like distant thunder. He extended a hand. Jace hesitated, then shook it. Shaq's grip was firm, warm, grounding. Rick stepped up, face sour. Mr. O'Neill, we need to run diagnostics before. Shaq raised a hand. Rick stopped mid-sentence. You sure this'll hold? Shaq asked Jace one last time. No, Jace replied. But it's better than sitting here while the whole thing cooks. Shaq nodded once, then turned to board the jet. Collins followed, scowling. Rick lingered a second, then spoke softly, sharp enough for Jace to feel it. This won't be forgotten. Jace smiled dryly. Good. Minutes later, the jet lifted off. No sparks this time. No fire. Just raw, precise power cutting across the desert sky. Jace stood in the shadow of its wake, watching it vanish into blue. He turned to walk back toward the hangar, but didn't get far. The radio on his belt crackled. Monroe. Hold tight. Someone from Shaq's team just called. Said you were to stay available. Jace froze. The words echoed in his chest, louder than the jet ever was. He looked out again at the sky. Stay available? For what? Contrast with Jace's bleak life. The desert was quiet by midnight. But not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the stillness that comes after everything living has retreated. And the only thing left is wind. And memory. Jace Monroe sat outside the hangar with a lukewarm cup of coffee and a bad feeling in his gut. The runway lights had gone dim hours ago, and the dispatch booth hadn't buzzed since he checked in that morning. His shift technically ended at 6, but he hadn't left. Not after what the radio had said. Stay available. He'd heard 100-odd orders in his life. That one stuck to his ribs. And now, under a low moon and endless stars, the weight of it was starting to settle. That's when the SUV pulled in. Matte black, tinted windows, chrome trim that gleamed like a scalpel. It rolled to a stop in front of the hangar like it had the place mapped down to the inch. No headlights, just silence. Then the soft click of a door unlocking from inside. Jace stood slowly. Didn't reach for his bag. Didn't move toward the vehicle. He just waited. The back door opened. A man stepped out, short, polished, wearing a headset and a gray tailored vest that fit like a glove. He didn't introduce himself. Mr. O'Neill would like to speak with you, he said, like he was ordering coffee. Jace didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed at the SUV, at the way the engine still purred, too quiet for its size. Every instinct told him this wasn't protocol. It wasn't business. This was something else. Am I in trouble? He asked flatly. The assistant smiled like someone who'd been trained to seem warm but never quite mastered it. We're not authorized to share details. Mr. O'Neill will explain. That didn't make it better. But Jace nodded anyway. What else could he do? Refuse a billionaire's invitation. After what had happened earlier, walking away would mean more than missed opportunity. It could mean blacklisting. Worse, it could mean suspicion. Nobody calls you at midnight for a thank you. Inside the SUV, the air was chilled, perfumed faintly with leather and eucalyptus. The driver didn't speak. The windows darkened further as the locks clicked shut. Jace's pulse thudded behind his ribs. He stared out at the highway vanishing behind them. They didn't play music, didn't make small talk. Just miles of dark asphalt and the occasional billboard glowing with casino lights that blurred into the stars. It wasn't until they passed the Vegas city limits that Jace realized they weren't heading toward any airport. They were going downtown. The SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that didn't need to advertise itself. The kind of place where security cameras don't blink, and every surface gleams like it's been scrubbed free of fingerprints or memories. Elevators waited with pre-coded destinations. They didn't ask what floor. The doors closed behind him with a soundless finality, and Jace was alone again. Not physically, but in that way he always felt when people around him had more power than they knew what to do with. The top floor opened to silence and marble, a private office, if you could call it that. It looked more like a penthouse designed by someone with both taste and ghosts. Abstract art, clean lines, hardwood floors that swallowed sound. In the corner, a bar with a single untouched glass. In the center, a desk bigger than Jace's apartment. And on the far end of the room, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Las Vegas into a sea of lights below. He didn't see Shaq at first. He was looking out at the city, hands behind his back, shoulders broad against the skyline like a statue carved out of a different age. He didn't turn when Jace entered. Just spoke. You ever been up this high before? Jace hesitated. In a plane. That earned a small chuckle. Not the kind of laugh from earlier at the hangar. This one was quieter, more personal. Shaq turned slowly, face calm but unreadable. He walked toward the bar, poured 2 glasses of water, handed one to Jace. No alcohol. No welcome. Just water. You fixed something today, Shaq said, voice low, deliberate. And I don't mean the jet. Jace sipped. Didn't answer. His stomach was tight, but not with fear. Not exactly. It was that edge between suspicion and curiosity, between being used and being seen. You ever wonder why we landed at your airstrip? Shaq continued. Thought it was an emergency. Jace replied. Shaq sat behind the desk, gestured for Jace to take the seat across from him. That jet logs every flight pattern, every altitude shift. It doesn't make emergency landings without cause. Thing is, it wasn't an emergency, not a real one. Jace stiffened. What are you saying? Shaq leaned forward, lacing his fingers. I'm saying I needed to meet someone. Someone who doesn't choke under pressure. Someone who knows what it's like to be dismissed before they've even opened their mouth. The room felt smaller suddenly, more focused. Jace's eyes narrowed. Why me? He asked. Shaq didn't blink. Because we ran your name through 3 different circles before I even stepped off that plane. Because your supervisor says you work twice the hours and speak half as much. Because your father used to run an engine rebuild shop in Baton Rouge that folded after a series of anonymous building code violations. That hit deeper than it should have. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was old, buried. Nobody brought up the Baton Rouge shop. Nobody but Ghost. Jace set the water down. So this wasn't about the plane. Shaq leaned back, exhaled. The plane was real. The fire was real. But the reason I didn't call for a Reno crew is because I wanted to see what kind of man would fix something without needing a camera on him. There it was. The judgment. The reason for the summon. Jace didn't know whether to be flattered or furious. You set me up. Shaq nodded slowly. I needed to know if I could trust someone with more than bolts. Someone who knows how to move quiet. Someone who's been forgotten enough times to know how to remember others. The words lingered. Then Shaq stood, walked to a wall panel, and tapped a screen. A series of photos appeared. Jets. Kids boarding them. Volunteers. A map with pinned locations. Chicago, Detroit. Tulsa. Every location marked in red had a story attached. And at the center of the screen, a header. Project Rebound. Access Flight Initiative. I'm building something, Shaq said, voice heavy now. Jets that don't carry billionaires. Jets that carry kids, teachers, counselors. Getting people where they need to be when the system won't. Jace stared at the screen. He wanted to be angry still, but something in him cracked. Something old and quiet, and half dead. It was his father's voice calling from under a rusted hood, saying, we fix things not 'cause they pay but 'cause they need fixing. Shaq turned from the screen. He needs someone who doesn't need praise, who works under pressure, who won't sell out the second a camera shows up. And if I say no? Jace asked. You go back to your hangar, Shaq said simply, with a story no one believes and an envelope no one questions. But if you say yes, this thing could be yours, in ways I can't even explain yet. Jace didn't answer. Not right away. He stood, walked to the window, stared out at the city. Neon lights blinked across his reflection. Somewhere in the glass, he saw a kid standing next to his father, both of them under a leaking roof, wrench in hand, hope in their eye. I'm not your charity case, Jace said finally. You're not, Shaq replied. You're my investment. And something in that, in the way it was said, in the quiet beneath it, felt real. Not scripted, not polished. Real. The elevator opened without a sound, like it was trained to reveal only what it wanted you to see. Jace stepped out into a space so silent, he wondered if the walls themselves were listening. He was in the heart of a penthouse, but this wasn't the kind of wealth that showed off. It was the kind that didn't need to. No gold, no branding, no neon lights or marble busts, just intention in every piece of architecture. Walls lined with black walnut, gallery-lit displays that held objects not for sale, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bent the Las Vegas skyline into a quiet hum beneath the stars. Jace moved carefully, his boots scuffing softly against the imported wood floor. He didn't know why he was back here. Not exactly. The last time he saw Shaq was in a moment that blurred the line between recruitment and test. That offer still hovered somewhere in the space between his ears. A 30-day contract with no title, no outline, and no guarantees.
It didn't feel like a job. It felt like being drafted into something you didn't have the full playbook for.
Come in, came a voice from deeper within the suite. Jace followed it past a glass sculpture that looked like it had been frozen mid-explosion, past a painting of a child standing alone on a basketball court with no net, and finally, into a wide-open living space. There was no staff, no assistants, no camera crews. Just Shaq, alone, standing by a glass table that held a series of jet schematics, each marked up with notes in red ink and highlighted margins that betrayed an engineer's eye. Shaq didn't look up at first, just circled the table slowly, as if trying to read more than just blueprints. You ever notice, Shaq said, voice low and steady, how the higher the building, the quieter the people. All that space, all that air, and still, no one says much. Jace didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to. Shaq finally looked up, eyes sharp, but not cold. It's because money doesn't make noise, the real kind. Not anymore. It doesn't have to prove itself, doesn't need to shout. It just is. And the people who hide behind it, they get quieter too. But for all the wrong reasons. He gestured to the couch, inviting Jace to sit. Jace hesitated, then did. The cushions didn't even creak. Everything was designed to hold weight without acknowledgement. You think I'm testing you, Shaq continued. And maybe I am, but not the way you think. I'm not looking for someone to kiss the ring or chase a paycheck. Jace leaned forward. Then what are you looking for? Shaq paused, the weight of the question sinking into the space between them. Someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who works like the cameras aren't coming. Someone who knows what it means to be overlooked and still chooses to build. He tapped the schematics. These jets, they're not for show. I'm launching a fleet, not to fly celebrities, but to fly opportunity. School kids from redline districts, mentors into zip codes, where hope is on life support. We're not announcing it yet. Don't want press, I want progress. Jace processed the words carefully. It sounded noble, but it also sounded expensive, dangerous, idealistic to the point of being naive. And it still didn't explain why him. I'm not a specialist, Jace said. I'm a mid-tier mechanic on a dying airstrip. You could have picked a dozen better people. Shaq walked toward the window, Las Vegas spilling out beneath him like a digital dream.
Better on paper, maybe.
But paper's not what I trust. I trust the man who doesn't blink when everything's burning. You didn't just fix that jet. You did it with vultures breathing down your neck and no backup. You kept your head when the rest of the crew wanted to blame the smoke on your skin. That last line landed hard. Too honest. Jace looked away. Shaq returned to the table and slid an envelope across to him. Inside, a contract, 30 days. Discretion required. Full access. Work based in 3 different cities. Each location a classified hangar. No name on the project. Just a code. FLT. You sign that, Shaq said. You report tomorrow. No fanfare. No welcome kit. You'll be inspected harder than the jets. But if you get through it, the rest takes care of itself. Jace picked up the contract, read the opening clause, then folded it. He didn't sign. Not. Feels like a setup, he said quietly. Shaq nodded. Because it is. The good kind. Jace stood and walked toward the window, trying to make sense of the skyline. It looked smaller now than it had when he entered. He thought about his father, the long nights spent cleaning carburetors under flickering bulbs, always telling Jace that machines had a language of their own, that if you listened close they told you what they needed. That same father died with debts larger than his shop, and a reputation smaller than he deserved. Jace turned back. How many other people are on this? Not many, Shaq replied. Fewer than you'd expect. Trust doesn't scale like it used to. And if I fail, then you'll fail doing something that mattered. Jace paced slowly, tension in his shoulders that wouldn't ease. He wasn't afraid of the work. He was afraid of the catch. The part they hadn't said yet. There's always a catch when people like Shaq walk into the lives of people like him. What aren't you telling me? Jace asked finally. Shaq didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted a small tablet and tapped a file. On the screen, a jet that looked similar to the one Jace had worked on. But this one had been stripped apart. Its casing was exposed. There were signs of tampering, wires rerouted, safety modules bypassed. This jet was meant to be in service last month, Shaq said. We caught the breach before launch. Someone wants this program to fail before it begins. There it was. The twist in the floorboards. You think someone's sabotaging you? Jace asked. Shaq nodded once. Not just me. The idea. The principle of it. Moving people who aren't supposed to move. And I'm supposed to what? Sniff out saboteurs and fix the wiring? I think you'll know when something doesn't add up, and I think you'll have the guts to call it out. The silence that followed was long and necessary. Jace sat again, not because he was tired, but because he needed to ground himself in something that didn't move. He stared at the contract, then looked up at Shaq. I'm not here to impress anyone, he said. If I take this, it's on my terms. Shaq smiled. That's exactly why I offered it. There was no ceremony, no handshake, just a man with oil under his nails and another with the world in his hands, separated only by trust, time, and the gravity of what they were about to start. Jace finally signed. Not because he believed in heroes, but because something in him was tired of watching machines break and pretending he didn't care. The jet that took Jace to Miami wasn't the same luxury beast that first roared onto the desert runway. But it moved like it had purpose. Smooth, silent, cloaked in the kind of privacy you couldn't buy, only be offered. The cabin was small but customized, and it carried only 2 passengers. Jace and a clipboard-wielding woman with the kind of posture that made it clear she wasn't here to chat. She said her name was Noelle Creed. Didn't offer a handshake, her nails were cut short, her eyes never strayed from her checklist, and her tone sat somewhere between military and corporate, a language Jace didn't speak but understood all too well. You'll be taken to Hangar Epsilon. Off-grid. You're not to use your phone inside, you're not to mention any names you hear. If you see a red tag on any equipment, do not touch it. If someone asks who you work for, your answer is, I'm here on behalf of the program. That's all. Understood? Jace nodded once, eyes out the window. The clouds parted to reveal a coast glittering under dawn like it had secrets to keep. He didn't ask what the red tags meant, didn't ask who else would be there, didn't ask why Shaq had been quiet ever since he signed the contract. He just watched the ocean curve and let the silence do its job. The hangar was hidden on the backside of a decommissioned naval runway, flanked by decoy signage and security teams that didn't wear uniforms but moved like they'd earned them. From the outside it looked like any other aircraft maintenance bay, aluminum siding, faded numbers, a whiff of old fuel in the air. But inside, the space opened into something surgical and enormous. Jets. At least 6 of them. All mid-sized, civilian class, but each one gutted or mid-repair. They were lined up like patients in a recovery ward, their steel bellies open, wires exposed, casings stripped down to essentials. No logos, no liveries, just the raw hum of machinery and purpose.
This is FAT-42, Noelle said flatly, stepping aside. Welcome to the job.
Jace didn't ask what FOTL stood for. He figured if it mattered, he'd hear it eventually. What did matter was that these jets were being re-engineered from the inside out, rewired, re-armored, refitted with fuel-efficient cores and adaptive navigation systems that were usually reserved for tech giants and high-end military contracts. But these weren't military birds, and they weren't flying CEOs. On a wall behind a row of workbenches, there was a photo collage. It was the only personal thing in the space. Dozens of faces, kids, teenagers, adults who looked like teachers or mentors or community leaders. Each picture pinned without a caption, but Jace didn't need one. He understood these were the passengers, the ones this fleet was being built for. Shaq funds the entire program privately. Noelle said, handing him a badge. No sponsors, no corporate fingerprints. These jets will fly on routes commercial airlines don't bother with. Some will connect isolated school districts, others will pull kids out of dangerous zones and get them to safer ones by morning. All of them are designed to disappear from the usual systems. Jace took it in slowly, without speaking. He didn't trust words anymore, not when they came too fast. He trusted what his hands could prove, and right now, what he saw looked clean, ambitious, maybe even noble. But nothing stays clean for long. The team wasn't big, maybe a dozen techs, a couple logistics guys, and a lead engineer who went by Garrett Wolf. Jace spotted him right away. Late 40s, sharp cheekbones, sleeveless shirt that revealed a prison ink timeline running up one arm, and eyes that measured people like he was recalculating their worth every time they opened their mouth. Wolf greeted Jace with a nod, not a handshake. You Shaq's pick? Just here for the work, Jace said. Everyone's here for the work until something breaks. Then they're here for excuses. Wolf walked off without waiting for a reply. By the end of the first day, Jace had already stripped down an auxiliary turbine on Jet 3, rebuilt part of the hydraulics on Jet 5, and spotted a flaw in the ventral wiring of Jet 2 that saved a week of diagnostics. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just worked the way he always had. Quiet, focused. Exact. But the resentment came anyway. It started with sarcasm. Wolf would mutter, "Our desert genius has arrived," when Jace walked in. Others laughed, but not kindly. A guy named Briggs, blonde with 2 white teeth and a clipboard he didn't seem to use, made a habit of accidentally moving Jace's tools to other bays. Someone turned down the temperature on his welding gloves one night, and he caught it just before the heat bit skin. No one used slurs, not out loud, but they didn't have to. The tone was enough. "You got a fan club?" Shaq said quietly one night over dinner. They were seated on folding chairs in a corner of the hangar that doubled as a break room. Shaq had arrived without an announcement and just sat down next to Jace like they were equals, not CEO and contractor. Jace didn't smile. I've had worse. Shaq leaned back. You sure? Wolf's not a small fry. He helped design the alt-routing systems for Delta's AI assist planes. He's here because he believes in this. Doesn't mean he likes the way I run it. He thinks I'm a favor, Jace said. Shaq nodded. Yeah, but I know you're the fix. They didn't say much else that night, but something shifted between them. A mutual understanding. They weren't friends. Not yet, but they were beginning to build something more durable. Trust, the kind that didn't rely on speeches. By week 2, the sabotage started. Jace arrived at Jet 4 one morning to find the left side casing opened when he'd sealed it shut the night before. Not just tampered, reversed. A safety sensor had been rewired to misfire under high velocity. If Jace hadn't double-checked it, the jet would have burned its tail section off mid-run. He flagged it to Wolf. The man just raised an eyebrow. Must have been a glitch. Jace stared at him. Glitches don't move screws. Later that day, someone left a note on Jace's toolbox. It wasn't signed. Just 4 words scribbled in pencil. You don't belong here. Jace didn't react. Not outwardly. But that night, as he cleaned grime from under his nails in a sink that barely drained, the memory of his father came back sharp. The nights his dad would scrub engine grease from his skin like it was a sin, muttering, "Clean hands don't mean clean treatment." He didn't tell Shaq. He didn't need to. Shaq already knew something was off. A few days later, Shaq showed Jace a photo from years ago. A young boy, no older than 10, sitting inside a gutted sedan with a busted steering column and a wrench twice his size in hand. The boy looked proud, greasy, unaware of the man he'd become. That's me, Shaq said. Before basketball, before the brand, just a kid who wanted to fix something with his stepdad. Jace studied the photo for a long moment. You miss it? He asked. Shaq shrugged. I miss earning things. These days, everyone thinks it's all easy, that money smooths out pain. Truth is, it just buys you better silence. They didn't talk about the sabotage. Not directly. But the air between them said it all. Something was wrong inside FLT 42, and it was getting louder. By the end of the 3rd week, Jace had uncovered 3 more mistakes. 1 miswired throttle, 1 falsified inspection log, and a coolant system that had been redirected to bypass thermal failsafes. Each one subtle, each one dangerous. And all of them happening only on the jets Jace had been assigned to. Someone wanted him gone. Not embarrassed. Discredited. Blamed. He didn't sleep much that week. Didn't talk much either. But he watched, and what he saw began to form a pattern. A pattern that would soon bring all the wrong truths to light. The morning started the way they all did. Early light crawling through the slats of the hangar, the smell of jet fuel hanging stubborn in the air, and a quiet tension that never seemed to leave the space anymore. Jace arrived just after 6, expecting another long day of bolt counts and silence, but the energy in the bay was already different. Heads were down, whispers circled like smoke. Jet 7, the final unit scheduled for launch-ready status, was cordoned off with bright red tape. Wolf didn't make eye contact when Jace walked in. That alone told him everything. Noel was already on the floor, talking to 2 men in sharp suits, who didn't belong here. One of them was flipping through a digital report. The other was studying the undercarriage of Jet 7, like he was trying to find guilt, etched into the paint. Jace didn't recognize them, but he didn't need to. They reeked of oversight, legal or corporate, maybe both. Noel looked up when she saw Jace, her expression tight. Don't touch anything, she said sharply, louder than necessary. You're not cleared until we sort this out. Jace didn't move. Sort what out? She didn't answer. One of the suits did. We've got a systems flag on this jet. Tampering. Autopilot module was overridden and rerouted to a dead protocol. If it had launched on this route, the jet would have frozen mid-sequence. Could have lost altitude in under 5 minutes. Jace blinked, confused. What? You worked on this jet, the man continued. No, I didn't, Jace said immediately. Jet 7 wasn't assigned to me. That's not what the logs say. Jace turned to Noel. You know my rotation. I didn't touch this bird. I worked on Jet 3 and Jet 5 this week. Noel hesitated, just for a breath. Enough to let doubt crawl in. The digital login system has your badge scanned from 2 nights ago. 11. Jace's heart dropped. I wasn't even here that night. I was in the off-site housing. Ask security. Check the cameras. There's no camera footage, the other suit said calmly. That sector of the hangar glitched out from 11:30 to 12:15. Must have been a power flicker. Too perfect. Too planned. Wolf walked over now, arms folded, mouth drawn into that thin line he always wore when he wanted to look neutral, but felt victorious. Funny how the new guy always ends up at the center of the mess, he said. Jace stared at him, reading every flicker of satisfaction behind the mask. Then his eyes moved past Wolf, to another figure standing off to the side, speaking to Noelle in a quiet, clipped voice. Tall, dark jacket, slicked hair. He hadn't been here before. Brent. That was the name Noelle used when she finally waved him over. She introduced him with the kind of tension you only reserve for names you wish you didn't have to say. Brent Calder. External compliance lead. Sent in by the advisory board to ensure our launches remain clean. Jace looked him over. Brent smiled like a man who already knew the ending to the story but was willing to let you suffer through the middle. Jace Monroe, Brent said, extending a hand like he was offering peace. Jace didn't take it. I don't need compliance advice. I need someone to check the scan records and find out who had access to my badge. Brent didn't drop his hand. Just let it linger a second too long before pulling it back. See, that's the thing, Jace. In a high-trust environment, mistakes don't come down to intention. They come down to accountability. Nice soundbite, Jace muttered. I've got plenty, Brent replied. The conversation ended without resolution. Jace was ordered to stay off all systems and tools until the internal investigation wrapped, which meant he was grounded, benched, watched. Worse than being accused was the silence that followed. Shaq didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send a message through Noelle. That absence stung more than anything, Brent had said. Jace wasn't naive. He knew powerful people played the long game, knew they waited until all the facts came out. But silence could feel like betrayal when you were the one on the line. 3 days passed. No updates, no clearance, no work. Jace sat in the off-site housing, watching the ceiling fan circle above him like a clock with no numbers. He tried calling Shaq once. No answer, no voicemail, just the dial tone and the echo of his own doubt growing louder. He thought about leaving, more than once. He packed a bag halfway on the second night, stared at it for 2 hours, unpacked it again. He wasn't staying for the paycheck. He wasn't even sure he was staying for the mission anymore. He was staying because something didn't add up, and walking away would mean handing the keys to whoever wanted him gone. That night, Jace stayed late in the common room. Everyone else had turned in. He opened his laptop, navigated through a private connection he'd used back at the Nevada hangar. It wasn't official protocol, but he wasn't playing by rules anymore. He backtracked the badged scans. What he found nearly stopped his breath. At 11:42 p.m., the system showed a badge swipe for J. Monroe, logged from a secondary entrance to Bay 3. But the IP tracking showed the ping came from a mirrored module, not the standard reader. Someone had spoofed the badge login, and only a systems engineer with root clearance could have done that. The only 2 people with that level of access? Wolf and Brent Calder. The next day, Jace didn't wait for permission. He walked into the hangar early, before most of the crew arrived. He approached Noelle as she was prepping her schedule. Her look said not now before he even opened his mouth. But Jace didn't flinch. Check the back-end log on my badge swipe, he said. They didn't just clone my scan. They rerouted it through a mirrored input. That's why the camera blackout happened. It was timed with the data spoof. Noelle stared at him. He saw the shift, the first fracture in her wall of control. I thought you weren't touching tech, she said. I didn't touch a wrench, Jace said. Doesn't mean I stopped thinking. She didn't respond, but she didn't dismiss him either. Later that day, she pulled him into a side room. Closed the door. Her voice was low. You're not wrong, she said. But it's worse than you think. Jace frowned. How bad? Brent isn't just compliance. He's linked to an independent aero contractor called Telos Axis. They tried to buy into the FLTL program 3 months ago. Shaq turned them down. Hard. Why? They wanted to privatize the ops, turn the fleet into a subscription network. VIP transport disguised as outreach. Let me guess, Jace said. Brent came in the back door. Noelle nodded. With board support. They wanted an insider to monitor the program. But I think Brent's goal was to torpedo it from the inside. Jace felt the anger build, but not the reckless kind. The clear, controlled kind. "You need to tell Shaq," he said. "I already did. And he's watching. But he wants proof." That was all Jace needed. By the time Brent found him later that afternoon, Jace had already planted a trace monitor on his own ID badge. He kept his answers short, neutral. Brent continued to needle him with passive suggestions. Asked about his comfort level, mentioned how sometimes places outgrow people, the usual stuff. But Jace wasn't listening anymore. He was cataloging every phrase, every time Brent accessed the system, every IP address linked to the diagnostics. The setup had started. But now, so had the reversal. Brent didn't know it yet, but the shadow on the runway was about to be lit from below. The rain hit Miami in sheets that night, soaking the tarmac outside Hangar Epsilon until it gleamed like a mirror cracked under sky. Jace stayed late after everyone else cleared out. The hum of distant thunder slipping through the roof seams like a warning wrapped in static. He'd been waiting all day for a signal from Noelle, for some confirmation that Brent's game was exposed, but nothing came. Just more silence, more waiting. But the waiting ended with a noise he didn't expect. A soft clink, metal on metal. It came from the back corner of the main hangar, where old maintenance lockers stood mostly forgotten. Jace turned, eyes narrowed, instincts sharp. He approached slowly, his boots wet against the concrete floor. The locker that had made the sound was half open. Not his. One of the older ones. No nameplate. Inside, sitting crooked on a shelf under a coiled emergency hose, was a tan envelope, worn, unsealed. Not hidden, not exactly, but left like it wanted to be found. Jace looked around. No movement, no one on shift. He reached in and pulled it out. There was no address on the front, no markings, just a handwritten note on the flap. "If the wrong ones find this, it'll be called betrayal. If the right one does, maybe it's just the truth." Inside was a folded piece of stationery. Thick, ivory-colored, creased from time. The handwriting was careful, old-fashioned, as if written by someone who still believed in penmanship. At the bottom of the page, the name was scrawled with gravity. Sergeant Lucius O'Neill Sr. Jace's stomach tensed. Shaq's father. He knew the name vaguely. Former military. A man who'd lived hard and quiet, never in the spotlight. But the tone of the letter felt different. It wasn't a father writing to a son. It was a man writing to whoever would pick up the torch. "Son, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you'll care. I was never good with saying what needed saying. But I know what men leave behind. I know what gets remembered, and what gets paved over. This world isn't built to lift the quiet ones. It's built to silence them. You've made it further than I ever dreamed. Built something from nothing. But I want you to remember, the real work doesn't get you headlines. It doesn't get you statues. It gets you scars. There are people out there who fix things because they must. People who show up even when no one's watching. You find one of those, you don't let go. That's how you build a future bigger than yourself. And when the day comes that someone wants to tear down what you're building, because it shines too bright, or speaks too loud, you protect it. Not with fists, with people who know how to hold the line. Find those people, son, and trust them more than you trust your name on a check." Jace sat down hard on the metal bench beside the locker. The letter wasn't meant for him, but somehow it fit his hands too well. His chest tightened. He could hear his own father's voice behind the words. That same rough dignity, that same belief in doing right, when no one else would. He folded the letter and slid it into his back pocket, heart pounding. That was when he noticed the second thing. Beneath the envelope, stuck between a cracked maintenance manual and a strip of old insulation, was a printed diagnostic sheet. The top was stamped with the FLTL-42 program's internal seal, but the signature at the bottom didn't match the rest. It was Brent's. The report detailed a system sweep for Jet 7, marked final clearance approved.
The date?
3 days before the failure. Jace stared at it, throat dry. Brent had cleared the jet before the tampering happened. Or more likely, before anyone was supposed to know about the tampering. Jace checked the paper again. There was a redacted field. Someone had tried to blur out the IP of the terminal the report was submitted from, but part of it had been missed. The last 3 digits were visible. Enough for someone like Jace to track. If he could get to the system. He didn't wait. 10 minutes later, he was in the systems bay, using a bypass tool he'd seen Noelle use twice when updating route schedules. He keyed into the diagnostics server, filtered the IP log by the digits he'd memorized, and there it was, Brent Calder. Access point. Override system. Time, 11.
Date, night of Jet 7 failure.
The system flagged the IP as temporary, used only once, then purged from active memory. But not before Jace caught it. He saved the data to a secure backup chip and shut the system down. No alarms, no movement. Just one more piece of the puzzle he hadn't asked to solve. The next morning, Jace brought the evidence to Noelle. Her face darkened as she read through the report, scanning the metadata with growing dread. "This proves Brent cleared Jet 7 before he faked your badge log," she whispered. "He knew what was coming, or he set it up." Jace nodded. "And this letter," he pulled it from his pocket, gently unfolding the page. "This is why it matters. Why Shaq built this whole thing in secret. It wasn't about image. It was about protection. Giving people a way out that didn't need permission from the world." Noelle took the letter, eyes scanning its worn lines. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice had changed. "Shaq needs to see this. All of it." But Jace hesitated. "Are you sure he doesn't already know?" Noelle looked at him. "He suspects. But suspicion isn't enough. He built this on trust. If he calls out Brent without proof, the board will hang him out to dry." Jace understood now. Brent hadn't come to evaluate. He'd come to sabotage, to create failure, so Tellus Axis could sweep in, declare the mission unsalvageable, and offer their own clean solution. Corporatized, privatized, monetized. Every ideal Shaq stood for, flipped into a business model. But Brent had made a mistake. He thought Jace was just a mechanic. He didn't know he was the kind who remembers the torque on a bolt, just by feel. The kind who watches people even closer than machines. The kind who reads silence like a map. That night, Jace stood in the middle of the hangar and looked around, not just at the jets, but at the workers. Some allies, some skeptics. And somewhere among them, Brent, watching, waiting. But Jace was done waiting. He walked back to his locker and began assembling something more dangerous than a wrench. The truth. And this time, he wouldn't be the only one holding it. The tension had been building like jet pressure behind a sealed valve. Jace felt it in his chest, in his jaw, in the way his hands clenched without meaning to every time Brent walked past like he owned the air between walls. The lies were no longer whispers. They were woven into the day's routine, into the way people looked at Jace, avoided him, second-guessed him even when he stood still. He'd done his part, tracked the badge fraud, exposed the IP manipulation, found the forged clearance reports. He'd even delivered the letter, the one from Shaq's father, to Noelle, who promised it would make its way into the right hands. But Shaq still hadn't said a word. And Jace was done waiting. He walked straight into the private observation room, built into the upper level of Hangar Epsilon, bypassing the floor where the board sometimes dropped in, and ignored the junior tech who tried to stop him. The door to the office was slightly ajar. He didn't knock. Shaq stood near the window, back to the door, watching the hangar floor through one-way glass. He looked calm, almost statuesque, but Jace had learned that silence like that was never peace. It was wait. "You knew," Jace said. Not a question. Shaq didn't turn around.
"Yeah."
Jace stepped forward, every muscle tight. "You knew Brent was setting me up. You knew about the badge, the camera blackout, the diagnostics forgery. You knew he was here to tank the program. And you let it keep going." Shaq finally turned, slow and deliberate. "Sit down." "I'm not sitting," Jace snapped. Shaq didn't push it. He walked to the small bar and poured 2 glasses of water, set one down on the table between them. "I've seen a lot of things in this business," Shaq said. "Sabotage doesn't always come from outside. Most of the time it's born from fear, from people who think control is the same thing as protection." Jace didn't blink. "Don't give me a metaphor, give me a reason." Shaq met his eyes, no dodging, no smirk, just quiet gravity. "I needed proof," he said. "Not suspicion, not gut instinct. Proof. Because when I take down a man like Brent, I don't get a second shot. If I'm wrong, the board turns on me. They pull funding. They sell off FLT 42 before I can stop the auction. And this thing we've built, it disappears overnight." Jace's chest tightened. "So you made me the proof?" "No," Shaq said firmly. "I trusted you to find it. I didn't plant it. I didn't manipulate the board. Brent walked into this hangar with his own playbook. I just gave him enough rope to use it. Jace didn't want to admit it, but somewhere deep in him, that clicked. Shaq hadn't used him. He'd believed in him. Not to succeed, but to see. Shaq stepped closer now. I read the letter, he said quietly. The one my father wrote. I'd forgotten it was here. He tucked it away in that locker when we were first building this place. Said someday someone would need it more than I did. He was right, Jace muttered. Shaq studied him. You still think you're just a mechanic? I think I was the only one willing to get my hands dirty, Jace replied. Shaq smiled faintly. That's the job. Now finish it. Jace didn't need more than that. The plan came together in silence. 2 days of quiet observation, of acting like everything was still fractured. He let Brent see him as tired, isolated, maybe even ready to quit. He asked the dumb questions in front of Wolf, let himself look unsure at terminals, leaned into the narrative that had been painted around him. Then he baited the hook. He left his locker open. Inside, a modified badge reader and a cracked tablet, both loaded with a decoy system. Exploit Jace had written himself using old FAA training code. It would look like a way to reroute diagnostics into external servers, hidden behind a fake login screen, with root access. It took less than 12 hours. At 2:14 a.m., Jace received the notification. Access triggered. Terminal 3B. Brent Calder. He didn't go to the hangar. He didn't need to, because tucked inside that locker was also a motion-triggered camera system, recording everything in infrared, audio and time-stamped metadata. Brent's face. Brent's hand on the tablet. Brent muttering to himself as he connected the dummy unit to the terminal. And then, the final nail. Brent saying aloud, let's see how long it takes the golden boy to wear this one. Jace smiled when he played it back. It wasn't just sabotage. It was intent. The next morning, the trap closed. Noel scheduled an emergency review meeting in the command room. Everyone required. No exceptions. Shaq sat at the head of the table, surrounded by a few board delegates flown in on short notice. No one knew why they'd been summoned. Brent was there too, calm and confident, flipping casually through his notes. When Jace walked in, Brent barely looked up. Monroe, he said, as if greeting a waiter. You're just in time. Jace didn't sit. He walked to the front of the room, plugged a secure drive into the projector system, and tapped the screen. Before we move forward, I need to show you something. The footage played. Clear, direct, undeniable. By the halfway mark, the room was dead quiet. By the end, Brent had stopped blinking. And when Jace replayed the audio, let's see how long it takes the golden boy to wear this one. The silence cracked open. Shaq didn't move at first. Then he stood, walked to Brent, looked him dead in the eyes. You know, Shaq said, voice low, I built this program to carry people who've never had a fair shot. You came here thinking I wouldn't notice you were trying to crash it before it could take off. You're not just a liar, Brent. You're dangerous. Brent tried to recover. This is out of context. No, Noel said, voice sharper than a scalpel. It's exactly in context. And now the board has it. Every frame. One of the delegates leaned forward, fingers steepled. Mr. Calder, we'll be freezing your access to all FLTA systems effective immediately. You'll be escorted off the premises until a full legal review is completed. Brent stood, anger barely hidden. You've made a mistake. No. Shaq cut in. You did. Security entered without being called. Brent didn't say another word. He was gone in under 2 minutes. When the room cleared and only Jace, Noel, and Shaq remained, the quiet was different. It wasn't heavy now. It was clean, like something toxic had finally been purged from the air. Jace sat down for the first time in hours. So, that's it? Shaq nodded. That's it. Noel smiled for the first time since the program began. The flights resume next week. Full launch in 6 cities. Jace exhaled. You really think it'll work? Shaq looked at him. It's already working. And for the first time, Jace believed it. Not because the villain had been exposed, but because the people still standing were the ones who hadn't flinched. The days after Brent's exposure passed in a blur. What had once been a hangar under suspicion became a space humming with focused energy. Jet crews moved without the weight of surveillance. The mechanics trusted each other again, and the silence that used to hang like fog in the corners was gone. Jace noticed it most in the morning. The way people greeted him differently, not like a threat or a fluke, but like a man who had earned his place. Brent was officially gone. His access revoked. The board moved quietly to distance themselves, releasing a statement filled with the usual corporate language about miscommunication and third-party overreach. But inside the program, everyone knew who had carried the truth to the surface. Not with drama, not with noise, but with grit and proof. Jace kept working like nothing had changed. Until one morning, when everything did. He was torque testing the stabilizer fins on Jet 3 when Noelle walked in with a clipboard and a smirk that didn't match her usual steel tone. "Shaq wants to see you," she said. "Now." Jace wiped his hands, checked his shirt for grease, and followed her through the glass corridor that connected the main hangar to the administrative wing. It still felt strange to walk these halls, clean, minimal, designed like a tech firm, more than an aviation hub. But his boots made the same sound on this floor as they did in the hangar, heavy, real, grounded. The elevator took them up to the top level, Shaq's floor. Noelle didn't enter, just handed Jace a sealed envelope. "Don't open it yet," she said. "He'll tell you when." Shaq was alone in his office, standing behind a wide table that overlooked the Atlantic. His back was to the door, as always, but when Jace entered, he turned immediately. No formality, no delay. "You look tired," Shaq said. "I sleep better than I used to." Shaq nodded, eyes narrowing. "You still think you're temporary here?" Jace didn't answer. Shaq gestured toward the chair across from him, then motioned to the envelope in Jace's hand. "Go ahead." Jace tore it open. Inside was a contract. Heavy cream paper, ink sharp and definitive. Title: Director of Operations, FLETU 42 Foundation. Full authority over mechanical hires, scheduling, diagnostics integrity, and fleet safety. Base nationwide. Autonomy granted. Report only to executive board. Jace stared at it for a moment, long enough for the words to blur. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know," Shaq replied. "That's why you're the right one." Silence hovered, heavy but not uncomfortable. "It's too big," Jace said finally. "I came here to fix a jet. You want me to run the sky?" Shaq chuckled, low and genuine. "You ever think maybe that jet fixed you first?" Jace stood, walked to the window, watched the clouds drifting like slow freight. This wasn't a simple promotion. It was a legacy wrapped in paper. The power to change lives. The burden to carry something that had almost been destroyed by the wrong hands. He turned back. "I want something else." Shaq raised a brow. "I don't want the title. Not like that. Give me the freedom to build a hands-on crew. Pull people like me, mechanics who've been overlooked, passed over, written off. The ones who know what it means to make things work when nothing should." Shaq smiled. "So you want to build the fleet beneath the fleet?" Jace nodded. "Exactly that. And the title? You can keep it. Or hang it somewhere no one looks." Shaq walked to a display cabinet behind his desk. Inside were awards, old sneakers from his rookie season, and a single object that didn't belong. A rusted wrench. Jace recognized it immediately. "The wrench I used on your jet back in Nevada," he said. Shaq opened the cabinet and took it out, holding it carefully. "It's not about how clean it is," he said. "It's about what it holds." He offered it to Jace. "Keep it. Build your crew. Write your rules. Just remember what this started as." Jace took it. Felt the weight. Not just steel, memory, proof that he mattered. He didn't cry. But something inside him softened in a way it hadn't in years. He shook Shaq's hand, firm and without ceremony. "Let's get to work." And for the first time, he meant it with everything in him. 10. The jet that changed a life. 1,500 words. The runway was wet with morning light. Not the harsh white of midday, or the romantic gold of dusk. This was the kind of light that made things honest. A quiet kind of honest. The sort that washed the world in soft grays and patient blues, and made everything look like it had survived something. The kind of light that made you remember. Jace stood behind the observation glass, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes locked on the tarmac. He wasn't the only one watching, but he was the only one standing still. Everything else moved. Luggage carts, traffic cones, orange-vested workers calling out into headsets. But Jace didn't move. Not until the jet rolled into view. It was Jet 5. One of his still had the same scuff mark near the belly panel from the first install of the upgraded landing gear. They'd kept it. Even when he told them they could buff it out. It became a kind of signature, a reminder that even perfection deserved a scar. A kid stepped onto the mobile stairs. Tall, nervous, shouldering a duffel bag with a college logo stitched into the side. Not expensive gear, but it was clean, earned. The kid turned just before ducking into the jet cabin and looked around, eyes wide, face young and full of hope, wrapped in fear. Jace smiled. He didn't know the kid's name. Didn't have to. He knew the story. Public school standout, raised by a single mom, turned down by 3 better-funded schools because they weren't sure about his transition rate. Picked up by a scholarship at a small state college 2,000 miles away. No way to get there on time. No family with the means. No favors owed. Just one call to FLT 42. And someone had said yes. That someone had been him. Not Shaq. Not the board. Just Jace. He made the routing decision. Approved the crew. Cleared the airframe. That jet, and the hope it carried, had his fingerprints all over it. He stayed by the window long after the plane lifted. Watched until the tail disappeared into the clouds. Until the sound of the turbines faded into nothing. Until the silence returned, not as emptiness but as clarity. And then he heard the voice. "You still watching Takeoffs like it's your first time?" Jace turned. Shaq stood beside him. No entourage. No clipboard. Just jeans, boots, and a hoodie that looked like it had seen more years than his foundation's oldest logo. There were more lines around his eyes now. Less weight in his shoulders. Not lighter, just better carry. Jace grinned. Only the ones that matter. They stood there a while without talking. They didn't need to. That's what made it different now. At some point, the silence between them had stopped being awkward and started being sacred. Shaq finally spoke. "That one had your call sign." "I know. Good call." They both looked out again. "Funny," Shaq said. "You used to just fix jets." "Still do. Now you launch people with them." Jace didn't reply right away. His eyes drifted to the far side of the field, where new jets, 4 more in build phase, sat under temporary awnings. A whole team worked on them now. His team, some of the best mechanics in the country, and not one of them hired from a traditional pipeline. All overlooked, all underestimated, all seen now. "You ever think it'd get this big?" Jace asked. Shaq shrugged. "I thought it'd break before it flew, but I knew it was worth building." "That kid out there?" Jace nodded toward the clouds. "He'll never know my name." Shaq smiled. "That's the point." They moved to the side bench, near the bay door. Sat down. Watched another crew run a pre-check on Jet 2. The same bench where Shaq once told Jace, "You don't talk much." Back when the idea of trust between them had still been a question, now it was the foundation. Jace leaned back. "I almost walked away. You know, that first day, when your pilot sneered. When your assistant got in my face." Shaq nodded. "I saw it. I thought I was being played." "You were." Jace chuckled. "Not the first time, but the last time you let it define you," Shaq said. That landed heavy. "True." Jace looked at him. "You ever think about your dad?" "All the time." "I read that letter again last week. The one he left you." Shaq's expression softened. "He said we should help the ones who help when no one's looking." And that's what we're doing." Jace stared out across the runway again, then down at his hands, grease under the nails still. Calluses thicker now, but they didn't feel like the hands of a mechanic anymore. They felt like the hands of someone who'd held purpose. "You keeping the wrench?" Shaq asked. Jace pulled it from his jacket. The old one, rusted and chipped but cleaned up just enough to be held with pride. He'd kept it close since the day Shaq gave it back. It wasn't just a reminder of where he started. It was a promise to never forget why. "Always," Jace said. "It's my compass." They sat until the wind picked up, the sun rising higher, the next crew shift clocking in behind them. The hum of life returned, but the quiet between them remained. And just before they stood to leave, Jace spoke one last time. "You never know when you're fixing something, if you're also fixing yourself." Shaq nodded, and neither of them said another word. Some stories don't end with applause. They begin with impact. If this one made you feel something real, you're exactly the kind of person who should stay tuned. Because behind every quiet hero is a louder truth. We haven't told yet. The next chapter's already moving. And the runway's still wide open.